We're joined by Fiona Melville. She's a partner in the Energy and Resources Group at Middleton's, and she joins me to discuss the carbon pricing mechanism as announced by the government on Sunday. Fiona, a warm welcome to BRR.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Well, Fiona, obviously the long-awaited details are here. Apart from the $23 starting price, what kind of system will we have?
Well, it will be a carbon trading scheme. It'll be a fixed price permit scheme for the first 3 years and then market price after that. So when people talk about it as a tax, they really mean that 3-year fixed price period. So it'll be a trading scheme. It will start from the 1st of July next year, and it will affect 500 liable entities.
Does the announcement now bring certainty for business?
Well, the reports yesterday from various different parts of business were quite interesting. Origin and AGL both said that this added certainty was a real benefit, and that the price of the $23 price was sufficient to actually change behaviour. So that's a very positive statement from two large energy companies. Other parts of industry, who perhaps will have more of the burden, have been less enthusiastic. But there has been some added certainty now, in the sense that we know what the scheme architecture looks like. We know we'll have a 3-year fixed price period. We know that we're then going to automatically move to market prices. We know that 50% of the market price permits can be sourced internationally. So there's never going to be complete certainty, and with this particular scheme, given how long it's taken for the scheme to sort of appear, to have complete certainty was never really on the cards. So I think what we've got is the best outcome from the fact that we have all of these different interests that need to be protected.
And Fiona, flowing from this, are we likely to see a flurry of activity?
Yes, I think we will do, because yesterday, both, as say, Origin and AGL commented that the $23 price is sufficient to change behaviour, which should mean that we start to see projects which have been on hold now sort of coming off hold. There's something like $90 billion worth of investment decisions to be made in the LNG gas industry that have been on hold. And I would expect that once the legislation's passed, those decisions will be made. The LNG industry is not very favourable at the moment towards the scheme, but if the scheme comes in, then I think it'll be crunch time for their decision making.
Well, Fiona, as announced, the scheme will apply to the top 500 polluters. What should they be doing now to get ready for the 1 July start date?
Well, I should think the first thing they'll do is reach into their bottom drawers and pull out their carbon trading files, because a lot of entities had already started preparing programs, and those programs now need to be revitalised. Main things they'll be doing will be things like checking the ENGA data, because previously they were obliged to send that data to the government, but there was no real consequence, so in the sense of the levels of the data. So now what they'll want to do is to make sure that that data is correct in every way. There's also likely to be some changes as to who is the reporting entity, so those will need to be looked at. They'll also want to look at their whole supply chain to see that they can pass the costs through, to make sure the contracts are correct. And then there's opportunities for energy efficiency and for emission-intense efficiencies. And the government has announced quite a lot of extra measures and funding. So I imagine that entities will want to really look at those extra measures. And then finally, for the very large entities, I think there's something like 55 of those, they'll need to make sure that they have a financial service licence, because a lot of the trading that they're going to want to do in buying these permits is likely to be classified as financial services. So I know that sort of 18 months ago there were quite a few entities that were looking at doing that, and so they'll now need to revitalise those plans.
Certainly there's likely to be many businesses affected indirectly by things such as costs being passed on. What are your key tips for those businesses?
Well, any business which has significant electricity or gas costs will really need to have a look at those contracts, because gas prices are going to go up by about 9% and electricity prices by 10%. So that will be on top of the additional energy rises that are in the pipeline. For example, in New South Wales, network charges are going up by 14% every year. So there's going to be quite an increase in electricity costs. So all entities that are large users of electricity really should be doing two things. One is to look at their contracts, because quite often they're on fixed price, fixed term contracts, and see if those costs are going to be passed through to them. I suspect they will be, because, as I say, this isn't really new. We've known about the carbon scheme for some time. It's just when it came into effect was unknown. So most retailers will have in their contracts the ability to pass the costs on. But the large entity users still have some things that they can do in relation to looking at energy efficiency, saving measures, in the same way that the actual liable entities will be doing those things as well.
Obviously the scheme's been fairly controversial. Who are the major winners and, I guess, the major losers?
Well, the major winners are the renewable energy sector and the gas sector, the gas generation sector, because the electricity prices in the market will go up, which means they'll benefit from that increase. And of course they won't have, in the renewable sector, any burden at all under the scheme, and in the gas sector a much reduced burden as compared to coal generation. So they're clearly the big winners, but then that's the point of the scheme. It's to encourage more renewable, it's to encourage more gas. The real losers under the scheme will be the trade exposed industries who really can't pass the costs on. They're working on average figures, so therefore if a particular entity is slightly more emission intense than another entity, they'll have a slightly higher cost. So those industries will suffer a genuine cost. And yesterday, in some of the reports I read, the business analysts were indicating that might be around 1 to 4% of a fall in earnings for those entities. But other industry players who will have a liability will usually be able to pass that liability onto their consumers, and the CPI increase is expected to be only 0.7%, so really the amount of the cost of this whole scheme that's being passed through is relatively small.
Fiona, thank you so much for joining me today on BRR.
Thank you very much.